And then you've asked me about Brexit, and I have a direct reply to France's position with respect to the UK and the post-Brexit situation. I'm in favour of the most integrated relations, the closest relations. And there is a solution we're very familiar with and that's EU membership. It's the situation which allows perfect access to the single market, access to the freedoms, and a very good integration. Now, I know one thing, and that is we cannot promise something to the people and then claim to give them the opposite. There are going to be negotiations. Michel Barnier is conducting them under a council mandate. But I think there's one thing that's very important. I'm very fond of our friendship with the UK. We have bilateral relations in defence and management of our common borders. But there's no cherry-picking in the single market. That's a simple principle. I believe in Europe, and therefore I believe in what we've done. The freedoms in Europe based on solidarity and full access means full respect to these freedoms of European jurisdiction and contribution to the budget. And then we know the different formula, but we've got to be consistent in the choices we make. That's what democracy is about. It's about explaining the what-if scenario right to the end. There's a lot of people proposing what-if scenarios, but they're not explaining what happens the day after. And then it's all about reality that has to be understood. Then on the principle of regions in Europe, I heard what you said about different cultures, and Europe has to respect that. But I also believe in a constitutional framework in which these cultural expressions exist. And clearly, you yourself, many of you here, are your parliamentarians, your European parliamentarians elected from different countries, France, Spain, and elsewhere. That sovereignty is expressed in a state. So that's my reply to you. Yes, we have to respect cultural specificity and the wealth of our diversity, but it has to be done in a democratic framework. It has to be democratic. And that presupposes that we respect the constitutions that our people have chosen, whether you like it or not. But these constitutions cannot be cut up. Sovereignty cannot be unravelled unless the people decide to do that. And then, quite rightly, the link with the European elections. I have received all different political groupings in France before taking my decision. First of all, the regional constituencies. Did they bring France closer to Europe and allow greater participation? No. What was the opinion of all political groups? To have one national constituency apart from yours. Now, I know you're defending that here, but I have to be honest and say you were the only ones wanting that. Everyone else wanted a national constituency, taking into account the fact that the constituencies that France had up to now did not correspond to any political or administrative reality, nor local identity. As you know, they'd simply been artificially cut up, and the only coherency was the phone directory, which was about 30 years old, and I don't think that corresponds to the reality of France, either yesterday, today or tomorrow. So that reform was something underscored by almost all the political colours in France. I think it was the right one. I believe in the Spitzencandidate system. I think it's very good, the lead candidate system. Now, today, I'm not part of any family group that you represent here. Well, that gives me freedom, and it's very in line with the spirit of the French Constitution. And with that freedom, it's my right not to have to get into your own political debates. It will be for the parliaments and the political families to do that, and I respect them, but that's not the preserve of the European Council nor of the President of France. So I think it is progress that the existing political families are proposing a lead candidate, or Spitzencandidate. In fact, I think if we'd been more democratic, we should have come up with a European demos. If we'd been coherent and pushed the reasoning right to the end, then that Spitzencandidate would have headed up a European list. I'm not against them. I'm just not in favour. Well, I'm not a member of a political family in your European Parliament. Let me just say to the person who put the question that all the states you cited are federal states. These have federal lists, and you're quite right to say they're not transnational, but that's because they're already federal. If we want to start thinking about federation, then clearly we have to have transnational lists. These would be truly European lists. There would no longer be national lists bearing European values. I think it's important to draw that distinction, because otherwise that might give rise to the wrong interpretation. And then several of you have talked about a Europe that provides protection. Well, that's the very principle that I wanted to take to the European Commission when I took up office. And some people have gone along with my motto. I do believe in a Europe that gives protection. That's the basis of sovereignty. Sovereignty means protection and the ability to express your voice amongst the nations and at international level. And in fact, it's our pact that means citizens believe in us. So yes, a Europe that gives protection. I've defended that in everything I've said and in my actions. And it's also in the name of a protecting Europe that I very much welcome what you're doing, and that I want greater, more ambitious reform of the work on the posting of workers. I think that's something people can understand, much more than electoral lists. It's nothing to do with our political mechanisms here that people are interested in. They're interested in any responses we can give to their daily lives. European citizens is not just the background, but that's the very substance of what we do here. So protecting Europe is how do we deal with social dumping in Europe? Let me speak frankly. If we defend a reform of the Posting of Workers Directive for a protecting Europe, then of course that's in line with European interest. We're not betraying European history at all. You who put the question to me, today it's not about fiscal and social dumping to make Europe progress. Now, I think that if we believe in Europe, we have to take note of the fact that we have ambitious policies. I defend those, whether it's agriculture or cohesion. Now, look at these policies. Look at the fundamental philosophical underpinnings of these policies. The idea was to make countries converge towards a European standard. For years now, we have accepted that these policies are funding alternative models in some places, i.e. fiscal and social dumping. So we're using cohesion funds to bring down taxes or create niche tax situation to attract companies, or to attract unsustainable models, or to pay workers even less, pay them very low wages to attract companies to Europe. Now, I very much believe we need to strengthen European competitiveness. In fact, I'm conducting such reforms in my country, but I believe it's impossible to engage in such policies if at the same time we're not trying to push for greater European cohesion and hence convergence, and use our directives, our law, and use the money we invest in our budget to allow for that convergence. So I believe in a protecting Europe. I believe in a Europe of convergence, particularly when it comes to tax and social areas, and fighting against aggressive tax planning and the non-cooperative stance of our countries. You've also asked me about trade policies. You raised the tensions that exist, and I agree with what President of the Commission Juncker said. I believe that in terms of our trade policies at multilateral level, there are rules, and it's the WTO rules, and I don't believe we should just go it alone at national level. These rules create the conditions for growth. However, I'm not naive, and that's why I've defended the strategic sectors that need to be defended. I don't think we can simply invest in all sectors without thinking in all countries. Well, look at what's happening in other countries, even those that are members of the WTO. They've always defended their own strategic interests. And I don't think we should be naive here. And finally, I think that our trade policy should be fully in line with our other objectives. The free trade agreement with Canada had been negotiated. The competence was a community one, after all, and it could have taken it even further. However, it was decided to send it back to the national parliaments. A lot of work was done in the French Parliament to allow for an improvement to be made to the text, and to ensure that before the text was ratified and throughout its application will be in line with our requirements, particularly when it comes to the climate. the Canadian Prime Minister will be speaking before the French Assembly this afternoon, and he'll be able to echo his adherence to these principles. Now, I think that in the future, our trade policy has to show consistency. In other words, any environmental, social and health concerns of ours has to be borne out in the trade negotiations. It simply isn't possible to negotiate any new treaties where we open up trade lines with certain areas or countries that either don't want the Paris Agreement or they decide that their social model is based on dumping or any either aggressive tax planning. So we might be defending trade, but it's simply not consistent with our environmental, social and tax requirements.